to Real Talk Retro. This is a brand new series here on the Vaughn George YouTube channel. Now, if you've been with me since the beginning, you will know that this channel fundamentally focuses on piano, keyboard, and synthesizer artists. But I did start this series a few months back just to address and to discuss my love of retro TV shows and movies. This is the second episode within this Real Talk Retro series, and if you click on the link in the description below, you can see episode 1, and in that episode I analyzed the music from the Airwolf TV show and broke it down into its parts. I've always loved the Airwolf TV show. I think the 80s spawned some of the most iconic and best TV shows as far as I'm concerned, and that is really what this Real Talk Retro series is about. Now, I want to make a special shout out to all the members of the Airwolf Facebook group. I've been a member of that for several months now. If you're an Airwolf fan, I would recommend that you join that group. It's not only full of banter and interesting people, it actually has quite a few helicopter pilots in there as well, so it does get really geeky and passionate and in-depth, and in fact Jean Bruce Scott herself is a member there as well, so it is a very good group to join if you are an Airwolf fan. And this indeed is the reason why I'm making this video today, is because recently within the Airwolf Facebook group I've been noticing a lot of questions flying around with people starting forums and a discussion, and that question is, should Airwolf be rebooted? And that is a big question, and in this video I'm going to give you my reasons as to why I think it should not be rebooted. But stick around till the end of this video, because we're going to have some interesting questions where you can get involved. Airwolf, reboot or not reboot? Well, I'm pretty strong on my opinion that it should not be rebooted, and I'm going to give you my reasons why. First things first, let's face it, if we look at movies and TV shows over the last generation, there have been a lot of reboots. I mean, especially in the superhero movies. If we look at like Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, those movies have typically been rebooted, as far as I'm concerned, far too many times. But the reason they have been rebooted is because it is possible to reboot certain types of movies. But rebooting Airwolf, I think, is going to be very, very challenging. And I'm going to tell you my reasons why I say that. It makes me think back in 2008, 2009, we got a reboot of Knight Rider. Now, that didn't do very well. If you knew the original Knight Rider with David Hasselhoff, it was a Pontiac Trans Am, and that was a very standout, amazing car at the time. Now, with every movie, especially if it's technology-based, you always need to stick with the times and you need to up the ante. So when we get to the reboot of Knight Rider, 2008, 2009, how do you improve upon the original series? Well, they got in some handsome guy, and sorry, I don't know his name, and we had a Ford Mustang playing the role of Kit. Now, a Ford Mustang is an American classic, and they had Val Kilmer as the voice of Kit. Now, I personally, I don't know, I think if you were younger and you that was your first Knight Rider, you would probably accept it. Of course, my first Knight Rider was Knight Rider from the 80s, so therefore my brain just couldn't accept this new Knight Rider. And also, let's look at what they did with the new Knight Rider. If we look at Kit from the 80s series, Michael, I do not think we should be doing that, Michael. He had that geeky voice. It was very geeky and very sort of like witty. Although it had the American accent, it had this real sort of like English butler type thing. Michael, have you thought about what you're doing? Hey buddy, let's go. So you had David Hasselhoff, who was this, yeah man, all-American guy, and you had, Kit, who was like this British butler. Like, are we thinking about this now? And that was the banter. If you fast forward to the 2008 re-release of Knight Rider, it was too cool, it was Val Kilmer's voice. And Val Kilmer is a incredibly cool guy, so I can see why they used him. And he was like, hey, and it was like so dark and edgy, and this is the problem I had with it. It took the quirkiness away from it, and Knight Rider was cool, but it also had this quirkiness and this cheesiness to it, which at the time we couldn't see. But that is what it was sincere. And by the time they did the reboot, there's this emphasis to make it so cool and edgy, and it just lost all of that. Now, this is the reason why I feel they would do the same with Airwolf. Now, there are a lot of technical challenges with rebooting Airwolf. I mean, with Knight Rider, could they reboot it again? Yes, of course they could. You know, it is not that difficult because you're just using a car. You just need to use the latest car and, you know, whatnot. But with Airwolf, I cannot think of a better helicopter than the Bell 222. I mean, this thing was just stunning. It was ahead of its time, and if you look at that helicopter now, it's still ahead of its time. If we look at Knight Rider, the old Pontiac Trans Am, you look at it now, it looks clunky and it looks dated. But if you look at the Bell 222, you know, even in its raw form, it is one of the most beautiful helicopters in the sky at the moment, just the lines and everything. And what they did, the way they modified it, was absolutely genius. I'm just holding this up here. I did show you guys this on my first video. And this was from a online resource called the Wolf's Lair. Now, I believe they're not doing this anymore, but this is a fantastic resource, and I might do a video on this later, where they go into a lot of detail about, you know, the filming of the pilot, you know, and what's particularly fascinating is how they, you know, how they modified the Bell 222 to, you know, to become the Airwolf we know, and also with photographs of the inside, how they started off in season 1 and how they updated it in season 2. A really, really fascinating resource, this, the Wolf's Lair. So unfortunately, I don't believe they're around anymore, but hey man, if you behind the Wolf's Lair are watching this, you did fantastic work, and I will review this in another episode. But for now, I just think that a reboot would be very difficult, because how do you get a better helicopter than the Bell 222? And indeed, in the discussion which is currently going on in the Airwolf Facebook group, a lot of people are giving, you know, putting ideas across for which helicopter should be used, should there be a reboot. And there are some fascinating suggestions. There was the, you know, the Apache and things like that. And I'll be honest with you, there is not one helicopter that I've sort of looked at and gone, maybe. It's all just been no, no, no. My fear is if they do a reboot of Airwolf, they will just make it so high tech, and it'll be really like, it'll probably be like a swing wing design and everything. It'll just lose its sincerity. And that brings me on to a big problem for a reboot. If we look at the TV series of Airwolf, when you watch something that is science fiction, you need to suspend disbelief to a point. Now, if we look at Airwolf the helicopter, it was a twin rotor body with a turbine system, and the propellers could propel it to 300 knots. Then, of course, what it could do, it could disengage its rotor system and ignite the turbines. Now, this is fascinating because if you look at physics, a helicopter, although helicopters can fly very fast, they obviously can't get to the point of Mach 1, Mach 2, which Airwolf was meant to be able to do. Mach 1 plus, I don't know the exact speed, comments below. But the bottom line is a helicopter or any aircraft which is propeller driven has a limit to how fast it can go. So the theory with Airwolf was it would disengage its rotor system and ignite the turbines. Now that was a clever way to describe it. However, with modern movies being so sort of credible and trying, you will find that movies in those days, you could get away with a lot more. You could be like, it's not believable, but yeah. These days with movies, they always try to make things really credible and believable. And that is where this would fall flat. I mean, if you just look at it logistically, for a helicopter or any aircraft with propellers, so to speak, for it to disengage its rotor system and then have turbines, you know, blasting and then propelling it up to Mach 1 plus or Mach 2, you'd rip off the propeller, even if it was disengaged. So this is the problem, I think, with a reboot. They would have too many logistical explanations to make clear to the audience, because, you know, especially when you watch Airwolf now and you watch it, I laugh at it because I just go, you look at it now and there's certain things that are a little bit lame. But at the time, it was amazing. But even at the time, if you were a technically minded person, I was a kid at the time, but if you were technically and analytically minded, you would look at this and go, okay, this is not possible, but it's enjoyable. Once again, if they did a reboot, first of all, I don't know how they're going to get a helicopter that is better looking than that. But they would have a problem trying to explain the logistics of how it works. Another huge problem would be the cast. And the cast were such a huge part of this, and I do actually want to, and I should have said this in the beginning of the video, I want to send my sincerest condolences to Alex Chord. Rest in peace, Alex Chord. I think he added such class to the series, and I just loved the banter between him and Dominic and Stringfellow Hawk. Stringfellow Hawk was this reclusive, kind of like a lone wolf, and he was reckless. And then there was Alex Chord, who was kind of like, he was always nervous because obviously Stringfellow Hawk was, in command of this high-tech piece of equipment which he was not supposed to be owning. So this is another reason why a reboot could not work. Of course, if they did a reboot, they would have to make it fit with the current situation of the world. So the whole story behind the 1983 Airwolf was it was built to be this unbeatable air weapon designed by Dr. Charles Henry Moffat. Charles Henry Moffat stole it while he was doing the flight, the demonstration, and he flew it to Libya, and he did some work for Comrade Gaddafi, as he called him, and he was using this just helping Gaddafi fight his war, and that was his way to have his way off with women. So it had quite a dark story to it, which I never saw as a kid, but you think of it now, it did have a very dark sort of adult theme underrunning. Stringfellow Hawk went to Libya, stole Airwolf back, and obviously Gabrielle died, unfortunately. He kills Moffat, he takes it back to America, but he's not going to give it back to Archangel. In the beginning, when Archangel and Gabriella, who was gorgeous as well, when they asked Stringfellow Hawk to retrieve Airwolf, they offered him $1 million, and he said, I want St. John. And that was the whole premise of this movie. Now, a reboot would not be able to really go down that same route. Having said that, it could be that in the modern version, Stringfellow Hawk's brother is lost in action in Afghanistan or something. They could do that, but one of the biggest challenges they would face, if we look at the 80s Airwolf, he had hidden it in what they called the Valley of the Gods. Well, and of course he would use Airwolf for missions for the firm, and of course the US government knew nothing about this. And the reality is that story would not hold up these days because, with satellites everywhere, there's no way he'd be able to hide it. So that story that they played on, which was really effective at the time, that story would not hold up today. So that is one of the big reasons as well. Also, I just can't see who would play those characters, and maybe I'm, being old-fashioned, but it is really a thing that Airwolf was of its time. My biggest fear that is if they did a reboot, it would just become too slick, and it would just be too slick. It would lose its sincerity. And also, what was so amazing about the original Airwolf is that was a real helicopter. Of course, they used remote-controlled helicopters and models for certain scenes, but you can just imagine with a reboot, they'd have to, I don't know, they could probably use a real helicopter, but there would be so much CGI involved, and they would probably do silly things like make it invisible, and and I just think they would just push it so far, and it would just become so slick, and it would lose its sincerity, and I just don't know how they would do that, and I could be completely wrong. But I just feel that Airwolf really is, as Calvin Harris says, it was acceptable in the 80s, it was acceptable at the time. It was of its time, and I just really don't know how they would, redo it. It would take a lot of clever storytelling, but my biggest concern is the helicopter. How the hell would they do that? And a lot of the flaws that we see in the original Airwolf, like the something that used to drive me crazy even as a kid was the stock footage that they kept using over and over. Like you'd see Airwolf fighting against a, let's say, he'd be chasing a Huey 1J, and when he fires the missile, then you'd see a Hughes 500 blowing up, or they'd be chased by two, Sabre jets. And then they'd say, oh, we're being chased by two Mirages. And that used to bother me even as a child. So, but I can look past that. And of course, just using so much stock footage. Of course, it is all those flaws and those and all that quirkiness that made it what it was. And of course, it was a real helicopter. Once again, a modern interpretation of that. I just feel it would be too over the top, it would be too digital, and it would be insincere. I just can't see how they would pull it off. And that is my take on it. I could be completely wrong, but as I say, I just can't see how they would do it. Now it's your turn. I would love to hear your input. What do you think? Question 1. Would you like to see Airwolf rebooted, yes or no? Question 2. If they did reboot Airwolf, what helicopter do you think should be used for Airwolf? And question 3, if they did do a reboot, who would be the cast members? Who would play the role of Stringfellow Hawk, Dominic Santini, Archangel, Caitlin? Who would play those characters? Leave your comments in the description below. I think that'll be a very, very fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your time. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, hit the like button, and depending on your feedback, we may or we may not do another video like this. Thank you for your time. I look forward to seeing you on a video soon. Adios.